Hello, juniors, and welcome to week 3 of virtual learning with your host, Mrs. Dawson. We are getting ready to start your big final project, which is the American Influence essay. So if you have not yet completed the Great Gatsby test, go back, take care of that, and then buckle up because this is what we are doing for the remainder of the semester. I know it's kind of scary to think about writing a paper not inside of a classroom, but I'll try to reassure you that I've taught papers online a number of times before, and I feel confident that you can do it. You're all attentive and ready to learn, and so let's get started. Today, I'm going to introduce you to what our paper is and what it will be about. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you and share my screen. Everything I talk to you about can be found in the file folders in the English 3 classroom on Edmodo. Not only that, but when I ask you to do a discussion board, you should find your small group, which will be named by your hour, 2nd hour, 4th hour, 7th hour, and then post your response in there to the prompt. So I'm going to try to keep on top of that, and here we go. I'll start sharing my screen with you here. Okay, so this is the Anatomy of Influence, or what I like to call the American Influence essay. And all of my examples come from The Great Gatsby because, first of all, that's what we just read, and it's a great example. Plus, it'll help make sense of it when you decide to write your own paper. What's cool about this paper is that it is not a typical research paper. Here's what a typical research paper might look like. Studenty Student in English 101, American Novel Literary Analysis Essay. In this paper, I will analyze the many literary tropes found within this novel. I will probably plagiarize bits and pieces off the internet, and I will probably scan forums for similar ideas. It is possible I will learn something English related, but it is also pretty likely that I will give you a basic biography or history summary. When I was in high school, my English teacher used to call this the data dump paper. You write about something and then you dump everything you've learned from outside sources into the paper. And even properly cited, that's really not very original. There's not much that's coming from you. It's all outside research. This paper asks you to be original, to have your own thoughts. So this paper is different than a typical paper because it requires you to create an original argument. It goes deeper than a literary analysis by asking you to look at the impact of an American novel. It expands the meaning of research for both teachers and students. So the things that you might have thought of as research, they'll be a little bit different in this. And lastly, it's helping you to prepare for college and career-ready writing. I consider this paper the gateway to composition, which is why, no matter if there's a pandemic or not, there was no way I was going to skip it. And most of you suggested that it was very important to you to be able to enter comp ready. So that's what this is going to do for you. So here is your overall goal for your paper. You are going to take an American work, a novel or piece of nonfiction, and argue its impact on society. To answer this, you'll look at how did the novel grapple with issues of its time? Who tried to censor it? What was it inspired by? How do we see it still today interacting with media and technology? And I'll add to that, and how has it been brought into our pop culture and adapted for different medium? So this is the question you are trying to answer. How has my book influenced American society and culture, and how has that influence, how is that influence continuing today? In order to answer this question, you are going to have to select a famous American novel or famous American book. The only stipulations that I ask is that it is, first of all, very well known, and secondly, is at least 20 to 30 years old. For example, you could probably analyze the impact of Twilight on our American society and culture, but we won't truly know whether or not Twilight stands the test of time for probably another 15 years or so. We don't know how it's going to stand up as literature in our society. So you're going to pick your own novel. But instead of reading it, you are going to look at how that book made a difference in America. Like, what did this book do, as opposed to what is it about? So here's the college and career readiness standards. If you're interested in that, just so you know, there's a purpose. You are writing an argument. Essentially, this is an expository writing paper. It is creating an argument about how this work influenced American society and culture. So here's our basic framework, okay? You'll start with pre-writing, which is where you select the novel you want to work with. You'll provide a quick summary of it. While you're not necessarily expected to read the book, that's not the point, you should briefly know what it is about. And I encourage you to pick one that maybe you're familiar with or have read before. That's often helpful. You should also know the main characters and the basic gist of what went on. Oh, and I almost forgot, it has to be an American work. So we can't do Lord of the Flies because technically that's a British author. Same with J.K. Rowling. So I would like you to make sure you pick something that is by an American author, because we are looking at American literature and its impact on our society specifically. Then you're going to be coming up with an original thesis. So instead of starting with the points you want to make, you're actually going to do research to discover what your point is going to be. So you're going to research a number of different areas. Then I'll teach you how to write paragraphs for drafting. We will create sandwiches with exposition, examples, and explanation. We'll revise. We'll do a little workshop. And then we will publish, which is another way of saying that you will turn it into me. So that's what we're looking at. This is all of the things that we deal with when we look at this paper. Its relationship to people, its historical impact, reviews, interactions, controversy, audiences, lots of things. So here's what you're going to do. You're actually going to research a number of different categories. You'll be looking at historical events. What are the events that influenced your book specifically? If we look at To Kill a Mockingbird, it was written in a different time period than it was set in, right? So how does that historical event have an impact? You might look at character demographics. For example, The Snowy Day by Ezra Keats was the first award-winning children's book to feature a Black protagonist. It was from 1961. The author's relationship with the book. If you're familiar with The Outsiders, then you know that S.E. Hinton wrote this novel when she was 17 years old. And so her experience with the gangs of Tulsa was a huge influence on this book and had a tremendous impact on what was going on and how people understood gang life during that time. Reactions and reviews. One of my favorite things that you get to research is how people reacted to this book at the time. For example, Huckleberry Finn was banned a number of times, but not for its racist nature and the language it used, you might think. Rather, it was banned because we have a 10-year-old child who was smoking, drinking, and swearing. Not only that, but it was also banned in particular states because it humanized Jim as a character. It made him too much like a regular person and not like a slave. And so those reactions and those reviews are really interesting to look at. Some books are steeped in controversy. Sorry, I skipped that one. One of my most interesting controversies I think you can look at is with The Catcher in the Rye. While the book itself is controversial and was banned several times, according to the American Library Association, for its swearing, depiction of a prostitute, the thing that it actually became most well known for is the man who murdered several people and said it was The Catcher in the Rye that inspired him to do so. So this book has always been controversial as a source of evil in the world, kind of like that same argument that people make when they say video games cause people to go out and do mass shootings. So yeah, popular culture. You will be able to look at commercial websites, find t-shirts, video games, and all kinds of cool things related to your book. You'll look at adaptations, things like comic books, things like movies, things like plays and musicals made about your book. And technological interactions. For example, did you know that Ray Bradbury said that he never wanted Fahrenheit 451 to be made into an electronic book? He said that that destroyed books just as surely as the firemen did in Fahrenheit 451. And it wasn't until a number of years after his death that his estate agreed to release Fahrenheit 451 in ebook form. Lastly, its impact on the country. In the 1960s, Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring, which was about the use of DDT and certain pesticides that was causing pollution into nearby streams and lakes, as well as killing off a large portion of bald eagles in the country. And so her book, Silent Spring, was about that environmental impact of pesticides. Since then, a number of environmental acts have come into place. The Environmental Protection Agency was formed as a direct result of Rachel Carson's work on this book, and it became very significant. If you remember Walden, people used that and were familiar with that as a source for the National Park Service and for conservationists later on. His early nature writing had a profound impact on that. So these are the categories in which you'll do research. You will be doing internet research, and you'll be checking out where you have the most information and what you think is the most interesting information. So that's what you'll start with. But in order to do this research, you're going to have to figure out that research is maybe not what you thought it was. Maybe it's not just looking at a book or on an internet website. Maybe it's doing something just a little bit different than you're used to. For example, I'm sure a teacher has told you, Wikipedia is not a source. Well, if we look at The Great Gatsby, it's hard to know how many adaptations The Great Gatsby has had. And by adaptations, I mean movies, plays, operas, other books, theater. If you go to the Wikipedia page for The Great Gatsby, you find all of these incredible sources. You find out that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 films. I think 7 now. You find out there's an opera. You find out there's a theater production. And you find out that there are a number of sequels written by people other than S. Scott Fitzgerald. Wikipedia has these all in a row. So while you don't necessarily want to cite Wikipedia, I highly recommend using it as a jumping off point. You will find a lot of information there. So that's one way to look at your research differently. Secondly, you may have been told in the past, .com websites aren't reliable. And the answer to that is no, not necessarily. But since then, .com websites are a lot different than they used to be. You know, you can end a website in whatever you want. But think about .com as being short for commercial. When you are studying the commercial impact of a book, it makes sense that you will go to a .com website. Here we see Out of Print's Great Gatsby t-shirt. They are selling them. That is an example of how pop culture has been influenced by The Great Gatsby. People are wearing the shirt. So that's one thing that you're looking at, is that commercial and cultural impact. YouTube will not help you. I highly, highly, highly recommend you look at YouTube for sources about your book. For example, Crash Course has educational resources relating to The Great Gatsby and a number of other books that have been watched millions of times. It shows that the educational system is still very much impacted by these novels. We still teach Gatsby. It's still considered relevant and important. Not only that, but YouTube is a great place to see interviews with your authors in order to see how their own lives impacted the books. Maurice Sendak is a great example of this. He is the author of Where the Wild Things Are. He talks frequently about the influences for his books in interviews, and the only way to access those is to go watch those videos. You're required to have at least one video source for this paper. Lastly, games are research. Well, there is a Great Gatsby video game, and it shows how the book influenced pop culture. It's hard to beat, literally. So I'm actually going to show you the website where this can be found. So give me 1 second as I pull it up here. What I used to do in the classroom was to have students walk in while I was playing this, and I would beat it in front of them as I introduced this paper. And then I would give extra credit to anyone who beat the game. So I hope you go check it out just because it's fun. Hopefully you'll be able to see it here. Oh my gosh. Well, chalk it up to technical difficulties. Not going to redo this paper, but I will send you the link so that you can play the Great Gatsby game, because like, who wouldn't want to do that? It's awesome. So we'll go back to my PowerPoint here. So games can be researched in this case, and I think are a really important part of your pop cultural research. Another thing that is cool about this is that you are going to do firsthand historical book review research. You are going to go to the historical New York Times and you're going to find an original book review of your book. So you can find out how people from 1925 reacted to The Great Gatsby. So if you look at the screenshot here, the date is April 19th, 1925. That was when this review was written. And it's called Scott Fitzgerald Looks into Middle Age by Edwin Clark. And it is a book review of The Great Gatsby at the time it was written. So you get to find out how people felt about it then, and then compare it to a book review today. How do they feel about it now, 105 years later? So that's the kind of thing that you're looking at. Oh, sorry, 95 years later, right? 1925, it's only 2020. Oof, this last year has been like 5 years, but yeah. So what you're gonna do is this. You're gonna do different research on different days. And you're gonna be kind of collecting that research, almost making a pile of it for a little while. Some days you're gonna find tons of stuff. For example, if you have The Outsiders, you're gonna have a day where you find tons of stuff on the author. Same if you have To Kill a Mockingbird, you are gonna find all kinds of stuff on that author. But some days you're not gonna find anything. For example, The Catcher in the Rye doesn't have any adaptations made about it. That is because the author specifically said that nobody was ever allowed to make his book into a movie. He would not sell the rights. His estate would not sell the rights. So you might find a whole bunch of stuff for controversy, but absolutely nothing for movies. That's okay. Here's why. You have to choose your focus. Nobody's just going to give this to you. You have to look through what you are able to find and see where the strongest influences appear to be, right? So you're going to do all this research, knowing that at the end, you have to rank it from the most information and the most interesting information to the least information and the least amount of stuff. If you're like, oh no, I can't find anything on this, don't freak. That's probably not going to be one of your points then. Just make sure you are looking hard enough. And I love to help with research. So please, please, please email me if you're struggling. So then you'll write paragraphs. And your paragraphs are our sandwich method with the top bun, the meat, and the bottom bun. And of course, you can have multiple examples in your paragraphs as well. I'm going to walk you through the writing of paragraphs once we're drafting, but it's going to be a while before we start drafting. Research comes first in this. So after you've got your paragraphs, you'll put them in a logical order. You'll create transitions and write a conclusion. I will walk you through every single step of this. You need to focus on how you think the book ultimately affected society and culture based upon the information that you found. So you don't walk in knowing the answer to this, but you come out with your own specific argument about how this book had an impact on our society. And of course, you'll create works cited. So the student examples I have here are for an introduction, a body paragraph, and a conclusion. I would like you to read these on your own because they're going to give you great examples. I will, however, point out one thing. In this one about Atlas Shrugged, you can look at the thesis in the very last sentence. Atlas Shrugged has had an effect on American culture, especially our politics, through its philosophy, impact on modern politics, and the initial reactions of people of the time period had of the book compared to current readers. So this person found the most information on philosophy, politics, and reviews. There's a body paragraph about where the wild things are. So this body paragraph is about Maurice Sendak and how his life impacted the book and showed other people his resources, his influences. And I'll let you go ahead and read that right now. Notice that the ABC News source, Sendak Speaks, is a video interview. So that was really valuable, really interesting, and also gives you something cool to research while you're looking at things. Here's a conclusion. This is from The Giver by Lois Lowry. You're probably familiar with it. My son Jonas is actually named after the main character of The Giver. So big fan of that book. It's pretty special to me. But what's interesting is this conclusion shows how the author proved that the book has had an impact because of the controversy and because it has adaptations and because it was related to historical events of the time. So you can kind of check that out on your own. And don't worry, I'm posting this PowerPoint so that you have access to it. So here's my bibliography of things that I use. I'm going to stop my share right now. So yeah, you are writing this American influence essay. Your very first assignment is to select a book. If you're like, I don't know what book to write. Well, luckily for you, I have a helpful handy dandy list of possible books. And if you would like to do one that is not on there, you are welcome to email me and ask, hey, can I use this one? So here are the assignment guidelines. You are going to read them on your own. I don't want you to read and summarize what this book is about. I'm asking you to figure out why the book matters. So that's the goal. And here are your objectives for the unit. What I wanted to draw your attention to is the possible American works to examine. I would like you to not do the same one as someone else in your hour. Okay? I would like you to pick something that you're interested in. If you already are familiar with the book, go ahead and pick that one. You're like, oh, I'm interested, I like it. If you are not familiar with these, or if you want to do something else, talk to me and we'll see what we can come up with. Books that are considered classics are far easier to research than others. Like if you look up a list of top American 100 novels, you'll find plenty to work with. The other thing I think is useful for you is to look at the tentative timeline for this paper. This is going to take you to the end of the year, and it's in here with your assignments. I'm going to give you a video every time I teach you how to do something. And lastly, we have the rubric for your literary influence paper. That's the bottom of this. Here's a sample paragraph to teach you how to write it. And once you've done all your research, we'll talk about how to organize your paper. And we'll show you how to do that. There's even a fill-in-the-blank thesis and an outline that you can type into. Okay, that was a lot. I hope after looking at all of this, you feel a little bit better about going into this book. So the first thing I need you to do now, I need you to look at that list or find your own, and I need you to pick a book. Choose a book that you would like to talk about that has had an impact on our society. And then once you've done that, I want you to post it to the discussion board that I'll have starting this Wednesday. And I'd like you to tell us which one you picked and why you picked it. That way we can all get each other kind of pumped up for this. All right, that's all I have for now. I realize that was a long video. I am looking forward to working on this paper with you. It's my favorite paper. I like it even better than any of the comp papers I teach. And I have full confidence you are going to kill it. So I will talk to you soon.